Okay guys, this is a video continuing my wacc series, weighted average cost of capital. And what I want to do today, right, I want to talk about the cost of equity. So this is not an easy, this is not a tough subject, right, but it just requires some sort of, delving into details, right? So what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to understand, okay, how do we determine cost of equity? So we have three ways to do it. So the first way, okay, is through CAPM, the capital asset pricing model. The second way, okay, is through the discount cash flow model. Okay? And then the third way, right, should be through, risk premia plus equity risk, right? Risk bond plus equity risk. Okay, so there are three ways to determine it. Okay, we're going to briefly go through each of these three ways. Okay, and the good thing about the fact that we have three ways and not one way, that you can actually consider those ways to be complementary to each other. So as I said before, right, in a financial industry, it's very important to have some sort of robustness checks, right? So if you're doing it through the CAPM, if you're doing it through the discount cash flow, and you're doing it through the risk premia methodology of equity versus bonds, okay, you're going to get three different numbers. Okay, if they're close, that's good. If they're not close, you need to go and revisit your assumptions. Okay. However, miraculously, usually, not every time, but usually, those three ways provide you kind of similar results. Okay? So what is the first way? What does it mean to, to do it through the CAPM? So remember the CAPM. The CAPM says to you, okay, that the return of your equity minus your risk-free rate, okay, is going to be what? Is going to be a beta times your market rate minus the risk-free rate. Okay? So, for example, if your market rate is going to be, say, 6%, okay? Say the risk-free rate now is almost zero, so let's say that it's zero. Okay? Then what will be your beta, let's say, okay, is going to be 0.5. Then your cost, mu, right, is going to be basically 0.5 times 6%. It is going to be 3%. Okay? It's pretty straightforward. Okay? Now, so this is like a way that a lot of corporations use, a lot of corporate guys use this way. Okay? Why do they use this way? Because in this way is somewhat public. Okay? You can actually estimate beta from your return time series. So you have a return time series for the stock. You have return time series for the bond, for the market, which is actually represented by the S&P 500, let's say, or if you have some other benchmark like the total stock market return, or maybe if you want, you can think about different indices like the Russell index, right? Then in this case, you will replace this mu market with the Russell index. Okay, you can actually find the beta using a simple regression analysis. Once you find the beta using a simple regression analysis, okay, you can actually find mu from this equation. And here, right, now everybody can do it. Everybody can do it, and that's why this method is actually somewhat acceptable. Now, there are caveats with this method, okay? The first caveat is, what is your risk-free rate? Now, in the recent years, right, the risk-free rate is actually almost zero. It's like 25 basis points, okay? But in the previous years, okay, the risk-free rate wasn't 5, 25 basis points, let's say 5%. Okay, so now you start looking on the data windows that you want to take. Do you want to take a 10-year data window? Do you want to take, a 5 data year in window to run this regression and to find beta? Okay, so here, okay, is where your judgment comes in. Okay, so if you are, if you have a long-term prediction, you may want to take a longer-term, historical data, and then the risk-free rate is not 25 basis points, right? But it may be, for example, a 5% or whatever. On the other hand, maybe you have your own, predictions of the risk-free rate. Maybe you say, okay, the population is getting older, for example, right? So I don't think that that bonds will be 5%, that bonds will go back to the 5% yields that they had. Maybe, the longer term is 2% or something. Then you are going to use this R here. So for example, in this case, if your R, let's say, if your future expectation of R, right, is 2%, you're going to say, oh my God, I have the following. I have mu minus 0.02, and here I'm going to have the same beta, so it's 0.5 times mu market. Say mu market was 6%, so it's 6% minus 2%. Okay, so I have mu minus 0.02 equals to 0.5 times 6 minus 2, so it's 0.02, right? So then mu is going to be 4%, right? So here's an example where R is not 0, but it's 2%. Okay, so it depends, CAPM depends on a lot of assumptions, like everything, of course, and also the beta, right? Once again, it can be somewhat unstable. The confidence interval for beta are not trivial. They are not very tight. Okay, beta can change during the historical times. Okay, beta can be closer to 1. During stress times when all the stocks are behaving the same, or beta can be actually 0.5 in different times. So you have to be careful what kind of windows when you're using when you run this regression. So this is the first way to do it. The second way to do it, right, is through your discount cash flow analysis. Okay, and this goes like this. So you have the D1, which is your dividend. You then divide by your price, and you add the growth rate. Okay, so the growth rate is whatever the growth rate going moving forward. Okay, and in this case, okay, this is going to be your your return. So if you're, for example, if your dividend versus your price, right, let's say D1 divided by P, let's say is 5%. Okay, and your growth rate and you're believing that the dividends will grow in a rate of 2% a year versus the price, so it's going to be 5% plus 2%, so your cost of equity will be 7%, right? Now, this D1, you have to be careful. This D1 is your dividend today times 1 plus the growth, right? So basically, this is your future dividend 1 year from now, okay? So you have to be a little bit careful here. Now, to find the growth rate, okay, once again, you need to rely on historical time series, right? You say, okay, I have a growth, I don't know what the growth rate is, but let me look on how the dividend, how the dividends of this company or how the price of this company, right, grew on a year-by-year basis, how the yield, right, how the dividend yield grew on a year-by-year basis, and then it will tell you, okay, what is your estimate for the growth? For example, you can do that, or once again, you may think, oh my God, I have a very good handle on this industry. I think this is like a very, very successful industry, so your growth may be different from historical time series, and then you need to plug it in here. Right? So for example, if it's your growth, let's say this was historical growth, but you are actually very bullish, you say that future growth is going to be not 2 but 5, so it's going to be 5% plus 5%, right? It's going to be 10%, and then this is going to be your cost of equity, okay? And the last way to do it, right, is basically, okay, you have the bond, you have the corporate bonds, or you have the government bonds. And for the government bonds, you can add a risk premium, right, to get your equity growth. Okay? So when you do that, let's say, you know, the corporate yield or the corporate risk or the corporate bonds, let's say the yield, let's say 5%. Okay? And now you determine that your equity premium for these bonds, right, was 5%, let's say was 4%, so it's 5% plus 4% is going to be 9%. Okay? So once again, how do you find all these things? Okay? So the corporate bonds yield is very easy. You just go to one of the indices which represent the bonds of your liking. Be it government bonds, you go to the treasury indices. Be it corporate bonds, investment grade, you go to the corporate indices. Be it high yield bonds, you go to the high yield index. You go to the high yield index and you can look on the yield. This is actually a public data available everywhere. You can do in Bloomberg, you can do everywhere. Then the tricky part is to find your, equity premium. So once again, what you want to think about, right? What is the yield on my equity? So say the company, right? So this you are doing not on a company level, but more on a sector level, right? So you are looking, for example, so this is a high-tech company. You look on a sector level. Say this is going to be computers or technology, right? And then you are going to bonds, okay, which are actually issued by technology company, okay? And then you compare, so say the technology company issues bonds, and you can look on historical time yields of these bonds. Yield 1 bond, yield 2 bond, right? And then what you can do, you can actually estimate the return that you have for the equities, okay? So let's say equities return 1T, yada, 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 RTB, okay? And then when you subtract one from another, right? When you subtract one from another, you're going to get your premium at each point in time, right? You can then take the average of these premiums, right? When you take the average of these premiums, you get this number, you have 5% plus 4%, you get 9%. So in this example, for example, right, we had this assumption that here we got 10%, here we get 9%, and here, right, in the CAPM, for example, we got only 4%. Then what you need to go, right, and do. Now, the difference here is quite big. 4%, 9% and 10%. I mean, in this case, you need to do a little bit more robustness checks and understand where it's coming from. So maybe it's coming from the fact that your risk-free rate is too aggressive. Maybe the risk-free rate cannot be 2%, but it's around 0% now. Maybe the fact that the risk premium here, right, maybe it's too high or it's too low. Or alternatively, the growth rate that you have here of 5% is too big. Okay? So when you do something, then when you have these three numbers, you have your due diligence, you want, to align your assumptions that they will be close to each other. If you can't, you can't. But you want to be able to defend your assumptions against, questions that other people will ask you in your corporation. Okay, so it was a great video, and hopefully you learned something from it. Okay, so once again, great talking to you. Bye.